Hello, inmates, and welcome back to the cellblock Scorch. I'm Cricket here for week 13. The prompt was given by Bones, and it was, he's a human being just like the rest of us. And then a responding pair of ellipses expressing humor or disbelief or something. And Bones also clarified that we could change the pronouns to whatever we desired, so whoever could be a human being, she or a group of people or anyone. I've been so excited to share this one with you. This one is so fun. So, without further ado, we say that all the time. Here is Into the Nevergreen Marsh. You want to know how it happened? Fine, I'll tell you. We would have been fine if we hadn't wandered into the Nevergreen Marsh. Unfortunately, we were following David's lead, and bad luck follows that guy, like he's its mother. So into the Nevergreen Marsh we went, trusting the map that sketchy peddler had sold us back in Turville. This sort of thing always happens to us, though. We can never fulfill even the simplest of requests without something going terribly wrong, like that time the Diushias of Arla hired us to fetch that... But I digress. Just know that it's enough to know that something always goes terribly wrong. This should have been a simple request. Ordinary citizen of Turville, a collector of rare herbs, requested that we fetch several specimens of the Glycomoya to plant for her. It grows up by Lake Tinawazi in the Humulia Mountains. No problem. 3 weeks' journey through the unclaimed lands, although it'd only be 1 week if we could cut through the Nevergreen Marsh instead of going around it, but everyone knows that you don't cut through the Nevergreen Marsh. So we bought this sketchy map from this peddler in Turville because there are no good maps of the unclaimed land, and peddlers are your best bet for any sort of even vaguely accurate information, and we set off. So it's me and Elzebeth and Conwa following David, and Wuka would have been with us too, but he was sick, so decided to rest up in Turville and keep an ear out for new requests and... Oh, right. Focus. Sorry. So anyway, we've been traveling for 3 days, and for whatever dumb reason, that morning David had the map and we were following him, and then he took a wrong turn. Or maybe not. All the legends you've heard about the Nevergreen Marsh, they're true, you know? Somehow it pulled us in, I guess. Before we knew it, we were staring at the oranges and reds of the plants that are greens and purples everywhere else in the world. But not there. Also, Elizabeth's tunic was slowly fading from green into white. Conwa cracked a joke about how it was apparently true that nothing green can exist in the Nevergreen Marsh. Guess the name's not an exaggeration. David stared at the map in horror, muttering about how we never should have ended up there, how it should have taken 4 more days to get there at least. So we decided we'd go back, but when we looked behind us, somehow there was only the marsh. We were already deep in, and there's this weird... I'd never heard of it before, but there's this periwinkle haze that floats in the air. It's sweet to inhale, but I think it's maybe a stimulant and makes you lose focus just a little. Because there we were in the Nevergreen Marsh, commenting on how great the air was and wondering what to do. David got mad that we'd been so misled by the peddler and his terrible map, and he threw it away, and Conwa looked more and more nervous. Elizabeth's hair had come out of its braid, and somehow she looked more and more like a spirit of the wastes, more than anything I've ever seen. Don't look at me like that. I know that the wastes are hundreds of miles from the Nevergreen Marsh, but that's what Elzebeth looked like. A spirit of the wastes. Her tunic was white and almost glowing, and there were little periwinkle particles gathering around her figure, and her hair was loose and flowing out past her hips, and there was something fierce and wild in her face that I'd never seen before. No, I swear this is important. Really. Elzebeth looked like a spirit of the wastes, and David had chucked the map, and Conwa wasn't even cracking jokes because everything looked the same, and we didn't know how we were going to get out of there when we ran across this rock. David got really stiff, reached out to touch it, and then walked around it, tracing it gently. I guess it was a boulder more than a rock. It was gleaming obsidian, and it was huge. So here's when things get weird. I know it was weird already. Elizabeth started to laugh. Look at where you've led us, David. Doesn't it feel familiar? David started out of his daze. Yeah, I know this. I belong here. I just know it somehow. I asked Conwa if he had any idea what was happening, but he was just as confused as I was. Elzebeth was climbing her way up the obsidian, and when she reached the top, she flung wide her arms, exclaiming, "Welcome home, you child of the marsh!" David was staring up at her with rapture on his face. "Welcome home to your people!" That's when I noticed the figures standing just a little ways off. The dwellers. All taller than we were, slender, with impossibly beautiful features and 1,000 shades of green eyes. I guess one thing is great in the Nevergreen Marsh. But they were coming slowly closer. Elizabeth, what are you talking about? What do you mean, his people? He's not a dweller. He's a human being, just like the rest of us. I was confused, and I just had to ask. Elizabeth just stared at me, amusement playing across her features. Yeah, Conwell managed to say. What's going on? Elizabeth threw her head back and cackled. Human? Just like the rest of us? Do I look human to you? Does your friend look human to you? She didn't look human either. She was a spirit of the wastes, even down to the tracing spiraling patterns that had appeared all over her, the pale gold obvious on her dark skin. We looked over to Dayfeed, and he was taller and longer, and his eyes dark green. He looked like a dweller, and they were coming closer. Sibilant whispers drifted towards us. Conwa and I couldn't understand them, but Dayfeed looked like he was listening, and he seemed happy, like he belonged. Rejoice, O marsh dwellers! I have brought your lost son home, Elizabeth exclaimed. She pounded a wooden staff firmly on the boulder. No, I'm not making this up, and I don't know where she got it, but I swear she had a staff, and she pounded it on the boulder, which cracked in two, and then she disappeared. The periwinkle dust lingered in the shape of her outline above the gaping chasm she had opened. The dwellers walked into it, and Dayfeed went with them, and as the last one crossed into the darkness, it turned to wink at us, teeth glinting. The rock closed back up, and I was just left with Conwa, who was trembling violently and clutching my arm. We should go, I said. He didn't respond and just started to cry, so I started walking. After what seemed a few moments, we emerged out of the Nevergreen Marsh into the middle of the night. It had been morning when we went in. There was a town ahead of us, so we approached. Somehow it was Huimulia, the town at the base of the mountains. We got into town, and I found out we'd been in the Nevergreen Marsh for over 3 months. But we had a request to fulfill. So we went up the mountain and found Lake Tinawazi, harvested the Glica. We spent a few days on that endeavor, and then one more day back in the town to recover. Then we came back to Turville to deliver the Glica and receive our pay. We met up with Wuka and told him everything. On my dear mother's soul, that's what happened. Elizabeth is a spirit of the wastes. Dayfeed is one of the dwellers. Conwa is still a trembling wreck, and Wuka's taking care of him, but he'd corroborate my story if he could speak. I know Wuka reported us all missing, but we're back. You order officers here in Turville have nothing to worry about. Elizabeth and Dayfeed didn't come back with us, but they're fine. I hope. Conwa and I didn't do anything to them. Why would I lie?
Hey, this is Bones with some judge comments. Okay, so Pesci and Cricket both wrote for this one. Pesci's was really good. I would recommend reading it. Very tragic. Unfortunately, I hated the main character. And, like, you aren't supposed to like the main character. Pesci did a really good job. But I didn't hate her in a fun way. And at the end of the day, I think I was just looking for a bit more weirdness, which, in the Scorch you just heard, Cricket supplied. So about Cricket's Scorch. This was a really fun one. I usually hate first-person stories. My brain interprets it as me being told what to do or something, and go figure, I have a problem with authority. Anyway, the exception is if it's clearly a story being told to me in the first person, which this is, and it gave the whole piece a really fun conversational quality. I love people slowly becoming creatures or being revealed to have been creatures the whole time. It's one of my favorite, like, slow horror reveal tropes. Very fun. And also the line at the end, the "Why Would I Lie," reminds me of a song that I adore called Lake Pontchartrain. And I know Cricket knows the song as well, so I'm pretty sure it was inspired by that, but I don't recall if she originally said so. But if it was, she'll probably mention it in her comments. So, without further ado, back to Cricket.
Oh my goodness. So this piece was an exercise in struggling to pronounce names that I typed and never had to say out loud. I had such a hard time reading this piece, and not just with the names, I was just struggling. I literally made a bloopers compilation that hopefully will show up somewhere in this episode. Or not. I mean, I told Bones if it's not funny to cut it, so we'll see. Don't blame them if there's no blooper reel. Blame me for not being funny. Yeah, this piece was super fun. The prompt definitely inspired me to have this kind of fantasy setting and to have someone who you thought was a human who's not a human. I wanted to write about like a little adventuring guild going on a quest or something, which was super fun. And then part of the way through writing the piece, and when I kind of knew the direction I was going, I was like, you know what? This reminds me a lot of the song Link Pontchartrain by Ludo. And if you've never heard the song, you're so welcome. Go look it up. I'm going to link it in the transcript, which is, of course, on our Patreon. It's just like a jam. It's also like a song that's a crucial part of my childhood. Like, one of my cousins had it on a playlist, or one of my aunts really loved it or something, and it's one that we would just, like, all go so hard for, and to this day, we still all go so hard for, and we're right. And so definitely by the very, very end of this piece, the last, like, paragraph is really inspired by what happens in that particular song. In terms of stories about a person losing their friends in a mysterious way and trying to explain themselves to the authorities. Uh, yeah, this was another fun piece for me to write. Looking at it, I'm like, I love this. I'm like, wow, this I feel like is one of the better short stories I've written. I tend to write moods and vibes, and I don't do as well with plot, especially in these short stories. I really just want to write like a scene or a feeling, which sometimes works and sometimes really doesn't. As I've mentioned before, dialogue is one of my stronger points, and I'm like, reading this piece back has me like, so the way to succeed in my short story contest is just to write it in the form of dialogue only, in that, in a greater sense, someone is telling the whole story, so everything is in it is dialogue, even when it's exposition. I think I loopholed myself into success on this one. Also, a fun fact on the names in this story, not the place names, maybe the place names, although I feel like I just made them up, but the people names, I definitely had seen some silly post on the internet that was like, if you want to create fantasy character names, just like have your mouth full of food and then say regular names. And then different people were talking about like different, chips versus soup versus bread and what kinds of fantasy names those would suit the best. And I know that is how I got the names in this story, is I just spoke regular people names with mouths full of food. Another thing that happens in this one that is so obvious to me is that like I hate naming my protagonists. And coming up with names is so stressful for me all the time, and it always feels weightier for like the person at the center of a story. So I write in the first person because a lot of the time it helps me avoid naming the person. Sometimes at all, sometimes just for a lot longer. But anyways, this piece was a fun piece. These little fellas come back. Stop, this is so funny. I was like, I think I've written maybe one other piece with them in. I just pulled up my little list where I keep track of all of my continuities. I actually have 5 pieces with these guys in them, but they don't come back until much, much later. So yeah, if you liked my little adventurers guild, there will be more stories. Most of the other stories I wrote about them I know are prequel, because obviously at this point the group has dissolved and they're kind of in chaos. But that was my entry for this week. Super fun piece to write, super fun to revisit it again to share with y'all. My prompt for the next week is definitely one that's just like a tone, a mood, as it were, and it is in all lowercase with a period after each separate idea. Dancing blue, shattered sunlight, heavenly laughter. And I feel like I have like a vague recollection of this being inspired by like an art piece I was looking at or something I was experiencing, and that would check out because I was taking like a world art history course that was, mandatory in university. So it's very possible that is what that came from. It feels correct to me. Hope y'all enjoyed. Please check out our Patreon if you want to see the transcript of this episode or see some other silly shenanigans for free. And if you subscribe to our Spark tier, you can also read all the Embers, which are the runner-up pieces every week. They're so good. Peishi did such a good job. Oh, I just looked at it again. Bones is still actively mad about this piece. We were discoursing about it earlier today. Peishi wrote a good piece as well this week. And, next week, Bones and Peishi both did a really good job as well. So I look forward to y'all hearing that. Thanks for keeping me company and keep those fires burning.
And now, some bloopers.
Something going terrible wrong. Like that time the Drea shiz. Oh. Douches. 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 Misled by the better. She pointed. Somehow it was Humulia. Woof, woof, woof. Somehow it was Huimulia. Somehow. We found it. But he'd corroborate my story. He'd corroborate my story if he could speak.
The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. We can be reached at thestellacore@gmail.com, through comments on your podcast platform of choice, our Instagram, Stella_core, and at our YouTube, also called Stellacore. Feel free to check out our other productions on our YouTube channel or our cosplays on Instagram. If you would like to support our creative endeavors, you can give a one-time tip to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches, or check out our Patreon, linked in the show notes. There, you can access the winning Scorches and episode transcripts for free, or sign up for Spark level support for $5 a month to gain access to all of the Scorch submissions.